Welcome to the forum tonight on how to finance human services. I'm Peggy Roberts, the chair of the Town Meeting Coordinating Committee, and TMCC works very hard to try to inform citizens and all people participating in town government to carry on informed debates and make informed decisions. TMCC is elected by town meeting. We're the only committee elected by town meeting. In the past 3 years, we've held 3 forums on various issues that we thought would be of interest to people interested in town government. And so this is our 4th. We try very hard in all of the information programs we give to not advocate one side or another. We really try to present you with the facts so that you can make informed decisions. We also have some other events that we're planning in connection with town meeting. On Sunday the 19th, we'll have a bus tour of sites related to articles in the town warrant. 12 noon to 2 o'clock meeting at the middle school parking lot. And then we have the warrant review co-sponsored with the League of Women Voters to review articles in the warrant. From 7 to 7:30 we'll have orientation for new town meeting members, and then from 7:30 to 9:30 we'll have the articles explained. Also, the week before I believe we start the 13th, there will be precinct meetings for people to discuss and learn about articles in the town warrant. And all of this information is on the town website. So if you are unsure of dates and times, always look on the town website. We are going to be experimenting tonight with some call-in questions. So if you have questions, call the number on the bottom of the screen, and we will try to handle these and see how it works. So tonight our forum is how to finance human services, and Carol Gray is going to introduce our speakers.
Hello, welcome. We're very pleased to have some experts in the field of human services who have volunteered their time tonight, and I'll give a brief introduction of each. First, we have Attorney Paulette Brooks, and Attorney Brooks specializes in immigration law, and she is also the co-chair of the Community Development Committee, and she's also on the board of ACTV, who we really appreciate ACTV hosting this forum as well for us. Paulette is also a town meeting member in Precinct 6, and she has also a background in working for the Department of Homeland Security before she was an immigration attorney. So we welcome Paulette. We also have Renee Moss, who is the director of Big Brothers Big Sisters program. She's been working there since 1985, and she's went to Hunter College and got a master's degree from Bank Street College, and she's also the co-director of Amherst Human Services Network, and we'll learn more about what that organization is doing from Renee. So thanks for coming, Renee. And we're very pleased to have Roy Rosenblatt, who is very knowledgeable in this field and has been working for decades in this area. It's always interesting to introduce people because we learn more about them. And what I've learned about Roy is that he went to UMass, graduated from UMass in 1975, and then went to the University of Alberta studying human genetics. And then he got involved in social services program with Native American children. And he began working for the town of Amherst in 1986 as the child care coordinator. That department was created to address town meeting concerns about lack of affordable, available child care. And that department evolved to what is now the Community Development Department, which manages the town's Community Development Block Grant Program. So welcome, Roy, and thank you all for joining us. And each of the panelists will speak for 10 minutes about their field, each giving a different perspective about this issue, and then we'll open it up to questions. So thank you.
Thank you, Carol, and thank you for everyone who took the time out tonight to hear and learn more about the Human Services funding. What I'm going to be covering today is a brief history of the Human Services Funding Committee, a typical yearly cycle, and the change, 2006 change from Human Services Funding Committee to the new committee's charge and name, the Community Development Committee. The Human Services Funding Committee was created between 1987 and 1988. At the time, the assistant town manager reviewed the requests from social services and assigned the funds. Administrative purpose of the committee solved two problems. Originally, the agency would go directly to town meeting if they were not happy with the amount they received. The Human Services Funding Committee was a venue for request and appeal. Agencies could appeal first to the committee, then to the Finance Committee, next to the Select Board, and finally to the town meeting. Forming a committee created an open and transparent process. The Human Services Funding Committee was formed with 5 members: Harry Brooks, Doris Holden, Pat Kearns, and 2 others that I don't have their names. I understand the budget at the time was $40,000 in 1987, and that amount increased through cost of living percentage over the years. When I joined the committee on May 17, 2004, the committee comprised of Mary Jane Louse, Hilda Ben Ezra, and myself. My second 3-year term runs to the end of June 30th, 2010. A typical yearly cycle I'm going to begin with the committee charge. From 1993, the Human Service Funding Committee charge has been: the committee reviews funding requests from human service agencies and recommends funding to the Select Board, the Finance Committee, and the Town Manager. The committee establishes appropriate procedures and adheres to Select Board guidelines in reviewing and recommending funding for human service agencies. Our budget evaluation follows the town cycle, always working 1 year in advance. During our first meeting of the new fiscal year, the committee would vote on priorities. We usually maintained past priorities of emergency, survival and critical services, preventive or supportive services, coordination, and planning. In 2005, additional criteria was used in evaluation of each proposal. First, that the need for such a program was well documented within the proposal. Second, that other sources of funds are not available. And third, that the services proposed are unique and not duplicated by another program. For our next step in the process, Mr. Rosenblatt would send out a request for proposals to all agencies. We would each get a packet of the proposals submitted. These proposals typically included, but was not limited to, the request for a specific amount of funds, a cover letter stating why the funding was important to the organization, the goals of the organization, the percentage and numbers of Amherst residents that the organization served, and always a financial statement, 501c3 paperwork, and tax filings. Each of the committee members would read the proposals at home. In the following meetings, we would discuss each proposal individually and how they fit against the criteria we had voted upon. I'm a visual person, so I usually created a spreadsheet listing the agencies down the left, the amount requested, and the committee's criteria across the top, and checks and notes where the criteria applied. The agencies usually requested more funding than the amount available. So we spent much of our meetings trying to decide how to respond and what amount to recommend. We often would break down the cost per hour, per client, to see the actual value of the service provided to the town. Deciding where the funds would go was a difficult task because it was like comparing apples to oranges. We often discussed the problem of trying to prioritize children's needs against the elderly, homelessness services against work and language skills. It was an impossible task. One year, we assigned each committee member 3 agencies to visit and report back. Individual agencies suddenly had enthusiastic advocates for their funding after a site visit and the actual understanding of the service they provided. After much discussion, the committee would vote on specific amounts to fund the agencies. This recommendation would then go to the town manager, and we appeared before the Finance Committee, the Select Board, with our recommendation. The ultimate decision for all human service funding within the budget went to town meeting each year. As a town employee, Mr. Rosenblatt was responsible for creating the contracts with each agency as well as follow-up reporting. The agencies entered into a contract with the town to provide services for the funds, and the signatory authority for the town is the town manager. Ruth Backus, Tamara Rutland Mills, Calvin Bauer, and Ruth Wade have all served for a time on the Human Services Funding Committee. For many years, the committee faced cuts to the human service budget. In 2004, the town budget allocated $133,000, and the committee recommended human services funding for approximately $140,000 in fiscal year 06 budget, cut down from the request totaling $152,700. By 2006, in addition to the request for proposals, we asked the agencies to document the choices they would make if the fundings were cut. The May 2, 2006 Human Service Funding Committee Recommendation Report gave our town meeting members this information from each agency documenting the specific number of service hours lost if the funding was cut. Also during the summer of 2006, the committee tried to study an impact evaluation with each of the agencies funded by the town. The committee asked each agency to identify 2 outcomes which would demonstrate the impact, benefit, or changes for participants as a direct result of their program and the funding provided by the town. Keeping in mind that outcomes are different from outputs, which focus on the number of clients taught, counseled, sheltered, fed, or clothed. This was a difficult task for the agencies, and a few reports we received were never compiled or evaluated. During the same summer, the Survival Center was in transition and upheaval. The committee became a sounding board, listening to the community involved, while acknowledging the report by the Human Rights Director, deciphering our committee's parameters of responsibility in an effort to bring healing and a substantive solution to the issues. Our committee oversight was limited to recommendations, and the town manager was responsible for contract oversight and enforcement. At that time, Ruth Wade left our committee and volunteered as a representative for the town on the Survival Center Board of Directors. During 2006, the Human Service Funding Committee was involved with the Community Development Block Grant proposals and public hearings. The Select Board decided to change our committee name and charge. And so from our charge grew. Now, instead of 5 members, we consist of 7 members that shall include 1 member representing the Housing Partnership Fair Housing Committee, 1 member representing the Public Transportation Committee. At least 2 committee members must be low or moderate income as defined by the United States Department of Housing and Urban Development. The committee charge summary is: the committee will be responsible for making recommendations to the Select Board regarding the town's community development block grant program that includes both social service and non-social service community development activities. The committee will host community events meetings to actively solicit input from residents whom specific proposed CDBG projects intend to serve. Gather input from Amherst residents, other boards and committees, and town departments about the CDBG program in general and about specific proposed CDBG projects. Review and evaluate funding requests from town boards, committees, local social service agencies, citizens, and others interested in receiving CDBG project funding from the town of Amherst. Make recommendations to the Select Board regarding CDBG projects to be included in grant applications. Schedule Select Board and hold CDBG program public hearings as required. Update town meeting annually. Monitor the progress of CDBG project implementation. The committee will continue to be responsible for making recommendations to the Select Board regarding requests from social service agencies interested in receiving funding from the town of Amherst. The committee will review funding requests from human service agencies interested in receiving funding from the town of Amherst, establishes appropriate procedures, and adheres to Select Board guidelines in reviewing and recommending funding from human service agencies, make funding recommendations to the Select Board, the Finance Committee, and the Town Manager, schedule and hold public hearings as required, periodically evaluate social service agencies that may include on-site review of program services, update town meeting members at annual town meeting of the progress of town-funded human service agencies, inform Amherst residents of the service provided by these human service agencies via various means such as town website, monthly ACTV, public announcements, etc. So that is our charge. It grew. The committee members are presently Mary Jane Louse and myself are co-chairs, Claude Tellier, Yana McClure, Isaac Ben Ezra, and Louis Rudolph. Mr. Rosenblatt continues to be our town employee liaison. The committee assists Mr. Rosenblatt in his efforts to obtain state funds through the Community Development Block Grant funding, 80% of which can be used for capital projects and 20% for social services. Mr. Rosenblatt can explain the criteria and limitations of this funding with some expertise. Funding by CDBG is strictly limited to specific criteria by the state and must serve low and moderate income populations under HUD guidelines. And acceptance of the funding requires strict reporting responsibilities. Administrative costs for this are figured into the formula, and this has been used to pay Mr. Rosenblatt's salary, considering he's responsible for the follow-up on the reporting. Amherst has been designated as a mini entitlement community off and on for a few years. This is determined by a state formula based on population, income, employment, and need. The Community Development Committee calls the public hearings, keeps the minutes for the grant, and makes the recommendations after the public hearings for the expenditure of the CDBG funds. In 2006, our committee was also encouraged by the town manager to target a specific problem in the community, using the funds to solve the problem rather than giving small amounts to organizations with little impact. Our committee struggled with this change and could not move in that direction. As I explained before, how do you compare apples with oranges? Can you shortchange one needy population to benefit another? What parameters guide that type of decision? Our committee refused to decide. During 2006 and 2007, the Select Board spent many meetings discussing the problem of homelessness. Our committee was encouraged to help find funding and address the problem. This past year, our committee met with the Committee on Homelessness, and our recommendation for the CDBG funding this year was birthed out of this collaboration and positive feedback during the CDBG public hearing in January. Our committee is painfully aware of the economic crisis and the devastating cuts proposed in every department of town government. Yet we felt we were moving forward. We were thrilled to recommend a capital project for the FY 2009 Community Development Block Grant of $450,000 that will provide funding for the purchase of property for homeless individuals. This recommendation will bring services to the homeless, complementing the homelessness outreach workers' last year's funding with a property purchase. An agency will take responsibility of the ownership and management, and the deed will be restricted in perpetuity, reverting to the town if the program is no longer viable. In addition, the social services were crafted to provide new projects for town services, as well as in-kind contributions of rental space provided. This is the first year that funding will not be requested through the town budget for human services. The 20% of the CDBG funding allocated for social services was recommended by our committee to provide funds for child care tuition assistance, funding for Big Brother, Big Sisters site-based mentoring program, Family Outreach of Amherst Emergency Assistance Fund, Amherst Survival Center's Family Night, These projects had not been previously funded and do not supplant prior funding. The recommendation was contingent upon a motion that was passed unanimously. If and when the CDBG mini entitlement status is withdrawn and the state no longer funds human service activities, the Community Development Committee will bring the request for funding back to town meeting. This is a quick and basic summary of the Community Development Committee's history, charge, and process. I've enjoyed working with the committee and have grown to appreciate the concern and compassion of my committee members and the Amherst community at large. I've grown to appreciate the agencies on the front lines who are making a difference in people's lives, and I'm grateful for the opportunity to be part of the process. Thank you.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Renee Moss, the director of Big Brothers Big Sisters of Hampshire County. To quickly summarize what Big Brothers Big Sisters does, I will start that most people recognize the name Big Brothers Big Sisters as a mentoring program. We match children who are in need of another adult in their lives with a volunteer from the community who makes a commitment for at least 1 year to get together with a child weekly. That is pretty much the public, sort of general impression of Big Brothers Big Sisters. But to go beneath the surface a bit, there's a lot more depth and breadth in the service, in that our staff is a staff of master's level professionals, social workers, and what we do is we screen and train our mentors, and then we provide ongoing support for the mentoring relationship. The case managers work very, very closely with families, and the families are referred to us by the schools and by other agencies. We work very closely with Family Outreach of Amherst. We share a lot of the same families. And once the match is made, our case managers stay in touch with the schools, stay in touch with the other agencies, and in touch with the parent, with the child, to make sure that we have a real broad context in which to really nurture and support this relationship. What we know from research is if a relationship fails, then that child will have had more harm than good by having one more disappointment in their lives. And for many of our children, they've had just too many disappointments for the short time that they've been on the planet. Often, our case managers are a lifeline to a family. Our case managers have gone to parent-teacher conferences. We often refer families who come to us in the beginning, we'll refer them to other programs, again, such as Family Outreach, such as the Parent Aid Program. So it's a way of really getting connected. What I see, especially in Amherst, is most of the families with whom we work are families that feel fairly disenfranchised from the mainstream culture here. We have a lovely downtown. We have a great library. And for our families, for many of our families, many of our children have never been to the Jones Library. Really don't relate to downtown as theirs. So in addition to building a one-to-one relationship with the child that really helps build self-esteem, develop confidence, competence, and caring in a child, we also are a bridge that helps a child, helps a family engage with the community in a more positive way. For the children in our program, the mentoring relationship can often give a child more of a sense of, okay, this is my community. We give access to free or discounted opportunities. So a child with their big brother or big sister can go to the Fine Arts Center and run into classmates who that child might feel fairly distant from usually, and suddenly be sharing a common experience. So, and given that we are part of Big Brothers Big Sisters of America, we use best practice in mentoring. We have research behind us. We're an evidence-based program. And so what we are giving the children and families who work with us is sort of a lot more than that sort of warm, fuzzy feeling that most people, think of when they think of a big brother or a big sister relationship. Not that it isn't warm, fuzzy. It is, but it certainly goes much deeper than that. What I what I've seen I've been here since '85, so in the 24 years that I've been at the program, as great as we are, and as I said, we provide really deep services. We're better when we're working in conjunction with other programs, and I think I can say that for the other programs as well. So if we're in there providing a big brother or a big sister, and once we begin to work with a family, if we match one sibling, we'll stay committed to that family. Many of our families we've worked with for years. But once we provide a big brother or a big sister, if perhaps we can make a referral to another agency and have a parent aide there, or have case management from family outreach, we see that the family really does make progress, that when we provide wraparound comprehensive services, we really make a difference in the lives of an entire family, not just the child, and of our entire community, not just the family. So that sort of leads me into the Amherst Human Services Network. For many years, I don't even know exactly how many at this point, I've co-chaired the Amherst Human Services Network. And now, we're big brothers, big sisters of Hampshire County, so therefore we serve all the towns in Hampshire County. But Amherst is the only town that has its own little human services network. And it is such an incredible opportunity for all of us. So we meet once a month, and it's open to anybody. And it's an opportunity for agencies that serve Amherst to really sit together and hear what the needs are and figure out how together we can help meet those needs. We can help solve problems. And we have people from the schools coming, and we have people from the 5 colleges coming. We have from Amherst College, the Center for Community Engagement, from UMass, the Office of Community Service Learning. So we're really able to gather our resources and focus in on what we're seeing as an issue for the town. So, given the broad spectrum that I get to see serving all of Hampshire County, I can see how much more we're getting in Amherst, and how the sum of what we're getting is so much great. The total of what we're getting is so much greater than the sum of our parts, something like that. Let's see. Just to say one more thing about Big Brothers Big Sisters, we are a program of the Center for Human Development. So what that means for us, what that means for the town, is that we have a really strong organization behind us that has an expert, that provides expert fiscal management of any monies we get from the town, we get from any sources, and provides HR resources and payroll and all that. So we are really here to serve the clients, and we're not dealing with that background thing that's happening by our parent organization, which really allows us to maximize our services to the clients we serve. The other thing is we leverage town funding. So, for instance, we have a grant from the state, and for every $1,000 we get from the town, we match that with a grant that we get from the state. We're always writing new grants. Right now, I'm writing a federal grant to try to bring more money in. So, and most of that usually ends up coming primarily to Amherst because we have so many resources here. Of the 150 or so clients we serve throughout the county, more than half of them are Amherst. So we are particularly responsive to the needs of families and children in Amherst. We have a real strong partnership with the schools and with the colleges, and and having our office right here in Amherst, again, it informs our services and really meeting the needs of this local community. So the support we've gotten from Amherst over the years has been incredible, has been great, has allowed us to leverage other funds over the years, and we look forward to continuing this special relationship with this very special community.
Thanks. Roy Rosenblatt, Community Development Director, staff to the Housing Partnership Fair Housing Committee, Community Development Committee, Committee on Homelessness. So what I think I will do after listening to Paulette's stunning presentation and description of the Community Development Block Grant Program is talk a little about Amherst's relationship to the Community Development Block Grant Program and some of the other thresholds that guide us in applying for funds. So Community Development Block Grant funds are funds from the Housing and Urban Development federal money that either gets distributed to the state or directly to communities. The larger communities in Massachusetts, Springfield, Holyoke, Boston, get money directly from HUD and therefore do not have to apply from the state. They get their money from the state and then they they get the money directly from the federal government and then report to the federal government. Massachusetts gets money and gives it out in two different ways. One are to what they call mini-entitlement communities, communities that are essentially entitled to receive money, but they still have to apply for funding, the grants still get reviewed, and they have to meet various threshold requirements. The other communities, on the other hand, have to compete like most agencies and towns and states do for other types of funding. Amherst, since I've worked for the town, been involved in the community development, been involved with community development block grants since the early 90s. We received money in 1991 for the construction of a child care center, the Amherst Child Care Center that's near Wildwood Elementary School. We received money in 91 or 92 to renovate the North Amherst School, and that's now being occupied, the top floor being occupied by the Amherst Head Start program. During the middle 90s, we did receive grants. I had very little to do with it at that point. I maybe helped with some social service applications, but mostly the programs were for housing rehabilitation, which supports individual homeowners who need rehabilitation and their incomes meet the HUD income guidelines for receipt of those funds. Towards the end of the 90s and early 2000s, Amherst, for some reason, was not competitive. I think we did apply for some grants, and I remember at one point we did not get grants for 3 years in a row. I think at that point we decided that we would not apply for any funding any longer, for a little while anyway. In the fall of 2004, we were notified, surprisingly, that we became a mini-entitlement community. Meant that we would actually be entitled and encouraged to apply, and that if our activities were both eligible and met what they call meeting a national objective, then we were assured of receiving funds. We were a mini-entitlement community in 2005 and 2006. In the fall of 2006, they told us we no longer met that criteria for mini-entitlement status, but they would give us $275,000 as a transitioning out mini-entitlement community. So we said, okay, well, we had that money for a while. In the fall of 2007, they told us again we're now, surprisingly, a mini-entitlement community. So we were again encouraged and essentially entitled to receive money. That, they said, would last 2 years for 2008 and 2009, and in the fall of 2009 we'll again hear whether, in fact, we still continue to meet their eligibility criteria. The criteria for funding involves both applying for an eligible activity and meeting a national objective. The criteria for eligible activities is relatively long. I don't want to go through them. I'd probably put people to sleep. But if anybody's interested, they can send me an email message and I can lead them to the long list or seemingly long list of eligible activities. I say seemingly because it's sort of like the old Monty Python cheese shop. There's tons of eligible activities, but it turns out nothing is really eligible. For example, they don't like to fund new construction. I actually was very surprised at that because I thought we had relatively substantive new construction projects, but I come to find out that they really don't like to do that. And as one learns more about the community development process, one understands why. It really based on the 1974 statute, was money for the revitalization of communities. So they were more interested in neighborhood redevelopment. Sometimes it's hard to fit Amherst into that particular box, which makes it a little difficult to fund eligible activities. Certainly they would fund village center activities as meeting other criteria, which I'll get to in a minute. So we have, over the last 3 or 4 years, struggled to find particular activities that they deemed eligible, and in 2006 we actually did use our money to help with a new construction project, the 11 units of new rental housing on Main Street, which will be managed by the Amherst Housing Authority. Property, housing owned by Valley Community Development, but land owned by the Housing Authority. A little maybe confusing, but true. The reason was that new construction is allowable if the project is done by a nonprofit development corporation and in a neighborhood revitalization district without the federal government actually ever defining revitalization districts. So I guess that was okay. The other criteria is that 51% of the beneficiaries of any activity must be low and moderate income according to HUD guidelines. We're in what they call the Springfield district, so essentially those HUD guidelines for the Springfield area apply to Amherst. So any activity, 51% of the beneficiaries have to be low and moderate income. It changes slightly if the whole town meets that criteria, but Amherst does not. So any activity we fund has to meet that criteria. In addition, the state has, I guess you would say, modified that regulation by saying that you also have to target your activities for particular geographic areas. They did that because HUD was questioning the accomplishments nationwide of the block grant program as it really meets the neighborhood revitalization criteria, and they wanted to see activities all focused in particular areas. But that, in effect, further restricts the types of activities that we can apply for as we proceed. Another criteria has to do with sustainable development. They want us to meet sustainable development criteria, and that means things like concentrated growth, protecting the environment, something that Amherst does well. Again, applying for projects within village centers, I think, would substantively meet those criteria. So those are the ways that we have to apply for money. In 2005, we modified a drainage problem at Pomeroy Lane Co-op for the bulk of our money. In 2006, we contributed to the Main Street project. That was $2.9 million in total, 11 units of affordable rental housing. In 2007, remember, that was our smaller year. That was a transition out of the mini entitlement status category, and we did receive $150,000 to provide 3 homeowners with affordable homes in Amherst, which will be restricted in perpetuity. So the purchaser of those homes, if and when the current owners sell, would also be available to low and moderate income homeowners. In 2008, we're doing building improvements to the North Amherst School. That becomes eligible because the tenants of that school currently meet the low-income criteria, the Amherst Survival Center being downstairs and the Amherst Head Start program being upstairs. In 2009, as Paulette suggested, we're applying for money to purchase housing for homeless individuals. We will issue an RFP disposing of those funds and hopefully will receive proposals that actually do something for permanent housing for homeless individuals. 80% of the funds can be used for capital projects. A maximum of 20% can be used for social services. Beginning in 2005, we used at least 50% of our money for child care tuition assistance. Part of the reason for doing that is in order to get the full 20% of social service funding, 50% has to be spent on job-related activities. Clearly, child care is such a program. It's also the history of the department starting as a child care department concerned with affordable quality child care makes that a likely thing to do. 50% of the rest of the money can be spent on other social service activities as recommended by the Community Development Committee to the town manager. As Paulette said, for this coming year, the committee has recommended funding for particular agencies, Family Outreach of Amherst, Amherst Survival Center, Big Brother, Big Sister. There's a potential change to that based on a proposal that was made to the Community Development Committee and recommended by the committee to the town manager, and it has to do with money that the town received as a result of a court case from the Housing Review Board back in the early middle 90s. I guess it's referred to now as the Waxman money. The intent would be to use those funds for the same purpose that we've requested funding for Family Outreach of Amherst, substantive amount of money for emergency assistance, emergency housing assistance, emergency fuel assistance, and emergency sheltering. Though technically, the receipt of this money and the court's determination that this will be used for emergency housing and emergency fuel would not be supplanting the current CDBG proposal. It somehow feels like it would be, so using this money for that purpose might be advisable. If we were to do this, this would also give us another $30,000 available in the Community Development Block Grant to provide additional funding for other social service programs. So that's yet to be determined. That proposal will be reviewed by the community, has been reviewed by the Community Development Committee, and will be reviewed by the Committee on Homelessness for final recommendation to the board, to the town manager and the select board. So I think I've covered most of it, and I guess we would be ready for questions. Thank you.
And now is your chance to ask questions about how human services can be funded. And I encourage those of you watching on TV to phone in your questions as well.
There's a plant in the audience.
Over here.
Hi, I was wondering if you could talk about what groups, under the proposal that's going to be coming before town meeting, what groups would be getting funding, what groups would not, and also could you talk a little bit about timelines, like in terms of if in a couple of years we're not a mini entitlement, when would we know that kind of information, and how would that fit in with the puzzle of town meeting funding? If you could address those things, please.
I'm not exactly sure I can, but I can answer it the best way I can in saying that this community development proposal is funding 3 agencies. Paulette said Big Brother, Big Sister Survival Center, and thank you. Family Outreach. It may not be funding Family Outreach because we may use other money depending on approvals. So that's the plan for next year. It's actually an 18-month period, but the proposals are actually 12-month proposals. We'll know in the fall, early fall, whether we're entitled for funding for future years. It would probably be for another 2 years. That doesn't mean we will not apply for grants. The town, I think, will do everything it can to try to even if we are in a mini entitlement community, to receive funding for the next cycle. We are absolutely allowed to apply for money, and we'll develop the best proposal we can and hope that we continue to receive CDBG money.
Could I ask a question about what are the sources of grant money for human services? Where would you look to apply?
Well, the only source that I have to apply to is Community Development Block Grant funding. I mean, there's a large number of presumably state money, but state money is, I really don't apply to state money for funding. In fact, Big Brother, Big Sister has applied for many state grants. Family Outreach is getting money. I think they had a contract with, right, but that may no longer exist as well. I'm not positive, but certainly looking to the state at this point is difficult at best, given the crisis the state's in. I mean, I just heard that Governor Patrick made another announcement about additional cuts or additional deficits at the state level. I don't know how that's going to translate to municipal cuts, but clearly the state's in deeper trouble than they suspected. On the other hand, there's significant stimulus money coming into the state, but finding out how they're going to allocate that or how it's to be used is a little difficult. For example, the state is getting 14 point something million for homelessness prevention. Public hearing is this Wednesday or next Wednesday, and they'll talk a little about how to access that. So there are two sides of that coin. There is going to be other monies, but I don't think they're clear about how that's going to be spent.
Do municipalities ever have foundation grants?
We do not. Not. We have trust funds, but
no, I mean applying for.
Not to my knowledge.
Outside foundations.
Generally, foundations and other agencies restrict funding so that municipalities are not eligible.
If I can just jump in here, I think what tends to happen is that the nonprofits, the agencies, have access to, applying to those kinds of funds. And what has happened is there's always been tremendous support from the town for that. So Roy or the town manager will write a letter of support, will do whatever they need to do to help us move that along. But as a matter of fact, right now, that state funding that I was talking about before is not in the governor's budget. So there was, I believe, $487,000 for mentoring throughout the state, and the governor has taken that out of his budget. So that may not be available this year. But it's just, and also I think the agencies are also, we're doing a lot of fundraising, a lot of individual donors, so it's not as if the nonprofits are depending only upon the town. But, our lifeline is our ability to have a mosaic of funding sources, but along with that comes 1 year not getting one year not getting another one. The other thing about the recovery package, the stimulus package, I have been working on a grant now that the Department of Justice has just put out an RFP for mentoring, and that's a 4-year grant, but it's highly competitive. So when we look at the needs in Hampshire County, we're up against Springfield and Holyoke and Boston, and it's national. So we're up against all these urban areas as well. But we certainly apply. I think the agencies that serve Amherst are pretty aggressive about going for whatever might be out there, and Amherst is very supportive, as are the Amherst schools. So recently there was a grant that we had to have a school district apply for mentoring, and the Amherst schools did that. They were the lead agencies. So I think what we have here, what's a real resource, what's very precious here in this town, is we have a wonderful collaboration, a real willingness to work together.
Was there a question over here?
Hi. I can only speak from the perspective of the Survival Center, because I'm on that board. And the conundrum seems to be that, of course, all the need is going way up. The people we're seeing is doubled for food and clothing and all sorts of services. Then the money has been drying up. We lost $30,000 from the state. That went bye-bye. And we're also realistic to know that the town is suffering fiscally. So we're trying to go forward with grants and fundraising and what have you, and not really look to the town for a lot of funding, although we would like it, of course. My question, I guess, has to do with the CDBG money, because it seems like once the town funding disappears and you're depending on only CDBG money, that seems very, iffy. So would you say that the idea is to not really count on that as a funding source because we may not be eligible?
These are extraordinary times, and I think, Aaron, would you like to answer this, please? These are, all I can say is these are extraordinary times, and the town has done what we can to ensure that these agencies have funding for next year.
Question over here.
Could I respond to that?
Oh, yes.
I think you need to document, and come through the process when and if that dries up. I know the Community Development Committee made a motion that if it does dry up, we're coming back. And ultimately, it's town meeting who makes that decision. It's a recommendation by our committee. It funnels through the Finance Committee, goes through the Select Board, and, if you can document the need, just, you have a good argument, and it's ultimately town meeting makes that decision.
Question?
Actually, 3 questions, if you'll forgive me. The first question is whether someone could tell us what agencies and programs that have been receiving town monies over the last couple of years will no longer be funded because they're not being funded through the block grant. And since there is this no supplanting rule, I imagine there's a number of programs both within the agencies that are going to get funded as well as the others. Why don't I let you take them one?
I think I would have to say that's the first question is unanswerable by anybody on this panel because it seems to be a little too specific. I'll have to let Peg or Carol address that, but I think I would rather not do that. Okay. I think it's. I'm sorry. I would rather not do that.
I'm not understanding, perhaps I didn't say that. My understanding is Amherst has been in previous years funding a group of agencies and programs within those agencies. You've just identified that there's not a proposal to use town funds for any agencies, and there's a proposal to use CDBG grant monies for us.
We were informed when we took a seat on this panel that we could not discuss any forthcoming warrant articles. And
advocate, but I think you can give factual information. Just don't take a position.
That's a fine.
There's a fine line here. That's an implied question.
I could basically give you both sides, but basically I'm moving into what will be an issue that will come forth in the warrant review and in town meeting.
Precinct meetings,
in
too.
the precinct meetings, too, where this format basically...
We were trying to keep it very general.
Okay, sorry.
And that will come forth, and we will be there with that information.
I'll think about my other questions and decide whether or not they qualify for this forum.
Thank you.
Question back.
Hi, I'm wondering what money will be allocated for helping the homeless or helping to find homes for homeless or build homes or for construction under CBD.
What would be
funding.
Eligible, do you mean?
No,
what would
I want to
likely?
know how much money would be forthcoming for a project for housing for homeless from CBDG funding. Or
Right.
what is thought to come forward?
Right now, we've applied for, and I would say, 99% sure. We'll be getting $450,000 to purchase properties for homeless individuals. There is another at least $500,000 available at the state level for those sorts of projects. It's a housing innovation fund, and this money is available for construction of housing, what they call alternative housing. It could be for homeless individuals, it could be for DMH clients, but there's an interesting little caveat. They go through a whole list of eligible alternative housing, and in fact, constructing housing in college communities is in and of itself an eligible thing to apply for. So we have this other $500,000 available. So it could be up to $1 million to purchase properties. The agency would have to apply for those funds, and we'd have to understand whether it was a reasonable project or not. But so there's probably at least $1 million available. We have, with the Waxman money, over $100,000 for emergency assistance, could provide emergency sheltering options in the coldest of months for individuals. So there's a number of types of options available now.
Are there other questions?
What are the variables that go into determining that cause us to fluctuate in and out of being a mini entitlement grant? What changes in population or other criteria affect that?
My understanding is the criteria that threw us out and put us back in was our unemployment rate. It's a relatively complex formula. There are 3 criteria. 2 are rather straightforward: population number. We far exceed the required population number. It's the poverty rate. It has to be greater than the state average. We far exceed the state average for the poverty rate. The third is what they call a community-wide needs score, a composite of 5 other measures weighted by some calculation, which might be as complicated as the school ed reform bill, but I doubt it. In any event, one of those numbers is the unemployment rate, and we were the years we fell into the category. I think we were 1 point shy when we fell out of the category. We obviously fell, and it's hard to see that our unemployment rate is going to dramatically change for next year. On the other hand, there's the major caveat that they always have the option of changing the numbers. So they could say, well, there are too many people falling into that category. We only want to give this much money to many entitlements, so we're going to increase the threshold, so now the unemployment rate is a little higher, and so you fall out. So it's a really what appears to be a greatly objective criteria, rather arbitrary. So.
Just in terms of if we fell out of the mini entitlement, it sounds like we would find that out in the fall.
Correct.
Is that right? So how would that, and Paulette was saying that the committee could go back to town meeting and ask for funds, but how would that, if the funding cycle is in the spring for town meeting, what do you do about this time difference?
The time difference is let's see if I can be factual, is easy. If we are mini entitlement, it's easy because we know what we're getting and we apply in February, and so there's no problem. If we're competitive, we will not know until July of the next year.
So does that mean that any agency would just not be funded for that next year?
I can't answer that question. All I can say is that we're now providing funding for agencies beginning, essentially it'll be August, September when we'll be able to release those funds. It'll be for a year. So they'll begin September of 2009 and continue funding probably through August, September of 2010. That would be the exact funding year for this new grant.
In this mosaic of funding sources that you referred to, and I imagine that you all agree that that's how these things work.
Absolutely.
Are there similar arcane rules? Is that kind of funding something that can be known about in advance? Do things show up?
For what?
Like the Waxman, amongst this mosaic, and I imagine a mosaic might be an alphabet soup as easily. And I'm wondering how those cycles look and how that application, how they work.
I'll just speak to the arcane rules. The Community Development Block Grant is about the arcanest, if that's a real word, grant that I've ever run into in the times that I've been writing grants. I think the criteria for other grants are much clearer. We used to get money from Department of Public Safety, and they were pretty straightforward. Renee could speak to her grants, but I think the CDBG requirements are just arcane.
Is there a political
Absolutely not.
influence on
Absolutely not. In fact, the more political pressure is placed, the less chance you have of getting funded. They have their formulas. They don't. it's not a political process. It's a straight up scoring process. Now, that's my understanding that, you know, if one of our representatives or senators were to try to place pressure on them, that would probably not work.
If there are no other questions, oh, is there one more question?
What is the criteria that can figure out what agencies would qualify? You don't have to talk about specific agencies, but what's the criteria that you use each year?
Aside from the work-related requirement of which we're using our money to provide childcare, the requirement would be first that there needs to be a community priority, either defined or combinedly defined by the Community Development Committee, and we're also supposed to rely on the needs assessment studies by the local CAP agency, Community Action. So it has to be a community priority. Other than that, other than the S word, what is the S word? The S word, I think, is called supplanting. Other than the supplanting requirement, most social service aid programs and activities are eligible.
What is the rule about the supplanting?
The supplanting rule says that you cannot fund an activity, remember the word activity, that's received state or local funds 12 months prior to the submission of the application. So I can be more specific about Big Brother, Big Sister, or the Survival Center. Those activities were funded absolutely separately from any town funds they received. And we confirmed this with them. We passed it by our program rep, and they agree with our interpretation that these activities are actually eligible because it would not be perceived to be supplanting. So any program for which supplanting isn't occurring that was a priority in the community, that was recommended by the Community Development Committee, that somehow was consistent with the community needs assessment done by Community Action, is an eligible activity.
Just a follow-up to that, because earlier we heard how the committee struggled with the goal to sort of spend big money and eliminate problems versus the reality that we face, that, you know, sometimes there's lots of little problems and sometimes they don't eliminate so easily. So I'm curious, how does this supplanting rule work in terms of the grant, renewing the grant funds itself? I mean, does the supplanting also mean that, you know, each new grant has to be some new thing, or can we continue if we got the things that we got funded this year into next year and the year beyond? One
of the wonderful things about the supplanting regulation is you can continue forever to fund programs that have previously received CDBG funding. Now, the other thing you can do is in fact, provide funding for activities that have been receiving federal money. So that one of the reasons we can fund the Big Brother, Big Sister site-based program is that was funded by a federal grant for a number of years. I don't know how many, but it was. So that was federally funded, and we can actually fund that or continue forever to fund a previously CDBG-funded activity.
So I have two questions, and I'll be as brief as I can. Community priorities. You just sort of slipped that in there.
I did.
And that sounded, and you put it in a place that made it sound kind of important to me. Is it?
Is it important?
Yes, that our community priorities are understood for garnering these grants.
Correct, yes.
How are they established?
Well, that's somewhat of a trick question.
I'm sorry.
But maybe the answer is a trick. When we looked at what we thought we needed to do this year, we looked at the state, and I hope I'm not treading on dangerous ground here, but I'll take the plunge. We looked at what the town was doing, and what, in fact, the Community Development Committee has done for the last 3 years is sustained funding for the agencies that were currently receiving funds. And so it did occur to us that those were priorities for the community.
And that's the test. That's an acceptable test.
It's an acceptable test, absolutely.
This
goes along with that. You had mentioned that the needs assessment was done by Community Action.
Well,
let
me be a little more. That was a little obtuse, I guess. Community Action, which is our now Community Action program, remembering the history maybe that we had a different Community Action program that no longer exists. Franklin Community Action Corporation. Well, that was the agency that then received the contract for our county. So they're really a large cap agency. The needs assessment they do is large. It really can't look at individual town needs. They do some broad brushes. And all you have to do essentially is show that your program is not inconsistent with the needs assessment and issues of poverty, youth development, emergency services are absolutely high on the list in anybody's needs assessment. So some ways the activities that we're funding, survival center activities for low-income families, for family night, mentoring, youth development is high on the list, and emergency services for fuel and housing is huge. Mm-hmm. So those programs absolutely meet both the community action needs assessment and the town's priorities. I would say personally that even if, very personally, that even if this hadn't been funded for years, those are, after watching services in the Amherst community, I would say that those are priorities for us. It's needs assessment, I think Paulette said this, are a little difficult in that, how would you decide between any of the services that the town has supported? They're all absolutely important. So if I've taken the plunge,
I would like to remind those of you watching replays of this forum that the call-in won't work for you. I'd like to thank our speakers very, very much for giving us lots of information, and certainly want to express our thanks to ACTV, which makes possible all sorts of wonderful information on town government. I encourage all of you, when you can't find a good TV program, look for a good one on ACTV. And do remember the bus tour at noon on Sunday at the middle school, the warrant review Tuesday night in the town room of Town Hall, 7 o'clock if you're a new town meeting member, 7:30 if you're there to hear about the warrant articles. And the precinct meetings are a wonderful chance to talk with your neighbors and discuss warrant articles in some depth. Replays of the program will be listed on the ACTV program on the town website and I guess ACTV site also. So thank you very much, and do try to keep up with Amherst government. It's interesting and challenging and important. Good night.